Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the second sermon in Ecclesiastes. That's Ecclesiastes chapter 3. By way of review, we've already noted that Ecclesiastes is set up into 5 sermons. Last time we looked at sermon number 1, the first sermon in chapters 1 and 2, and we saw their Solomon's story, and it started off with this declaration of emptiness. All is emptiness, all is vanity, all is empty. Havel is the Hebrew term there. Um, and then we were introduced to 4 themes. That there is a monotony to life that was in the preface, in the opening prologue. Then there is an emptiness in wisdom, that there is futility in wealth, and I guess you could say wealth and power, but I'm just going to stick to wealth right now. And finally, that there is a certainty of death, but enjoy what you have as a gift from God. And so that's how it closes, that all of life is emptiness, but man ought to enjoy goodness because it is from God. That's the first sermon. Now we come to the second sermon. I'm going to entitle it Seasons of Life, and you'll see why as soon as we get into it. And it will talk about how there is a monotony to life, which is one of those 4 themes. So we're getting into the first of those 4 themes. They were introduced in chapters 1 and 2 in the first sermon, and now in each subsequent sermon, we're going to see the rest of those 4 themes become the object of greater focus. Chapter 3 and verse 1, there is an appointed time for everything. And there is a time. Now, notice when he talks about an appointed time, the term there is zaman, an appointed time. And then there's a different word here, and there is a time for every event under heaven. So I've got 2 different words for time here. It has the same basic meaning. This is what we see in Hebrew parallelism, where you say it, and then you say the same thing, but with different words. So it's not a big deal that it's a different word. I just want you to see the sort of repetition and the parallelism, because this is poetry. So an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every event under heaven, and now we begin a time, and it's eth is the same Hebrew word here, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. Notice a time for one thing, and the opposite of birth is death. The opposite of planting is uprooting what's planted. Verse 3, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up. We continue in verse 4, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent. I have to stop and think about that. And a time to speak. I think we're at our time to speak right now. A time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Verse 9, what profit is there to the worker? The term worker, ha use, asa is just the basic word to make something or to work or something like that. So it's an okay translation. I'm not correcting it or anything. What profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? So we notice the worker toils. And then verse 10, I have seen the task which God has given. Now the term here, a different word, ha-i-nen, I mention it here because this word will be repeated. So I've seen the task which God has given to the sons of men, with which to occupy, and here the term le anot. The terms it's the same word. One is the noun, and one is the the plural, because occupying themselves. Um, but it's the same word. And so I guess you could render it, I've seen the task which God has given to the sons of men with which to task themselves. That's not really good English, but it works in the Hebrew. Or I have seen the occupation which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. There, I think that works a little bit better. The ESV renders it this way: I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Just want to catch the repetition there. Verse 11, he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity, and the term there, appropriate, Yahweh. Um, there's a city by that name, Jaffa, and it's right on the ocean. And I guess appropriate's okay, but I would go along with the King James here, where it rendered it beautiful. And I think that's just I think it's a better translation. It's not just appropriate. When it all works together, it's beautiful. All of those different seasons, and I think that's what we're seeing here. But also, that's not the end of the message. He has also set eternity in their heart. Now, what does that mean? Everything's beautiful. The time to be born, the time to die, all of those things can be beautiful, but that's not the whole story. The rest of the story is that we feel like we look at it and we say, there just seems to be something else, something beyond that, which we hunger for. He has set also eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Um, we feel like there's more, but without God's revelation, we can't tell the beginning or the end. I know scientists try to do that, and they've come up with all sorts of hypotheses. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong, but they've missed the bigger part of the story. There is a beginning and there is an end, and God is wrapped up in both beginning and end, so that we have a sense of the eternal, and yet we are mortal and we're cut off. We weren't here in the beginning. We weren't there to see it. We can be told about it, but we didn't see that. And in this life, we're also cut off from the end. Let me just say, you're not going to see the end, probably. I mean, if Christ comes back, in your lifetime, maybe. But in the meantime, most of us, throughout history, and if Christ doesn't return pretty soon, then we're going to see death, and we won't see after that until and the preacher isn't telling us what comes after that. That hasn't been revealed yet in his day. Now it has for us. Well, we're living in the New Testament age. We're living in the age after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. But that hadn't happened yet in his day. So it's veiled. It's a maybe, and we're going to see that as a big question mark throughout most of Ecclesiastes. But we will see a couple hints along the way. Verse 12. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. Now, in this, I know he's going to come to three conclusions. First of all, I know that we ought to enjoy the good that we have. Nothing better than to rejoice and do good and enjoy it. That's a gift from God. So, conclusion number one: enjoy the good that you get as a gift from God. Conclusion number 2, verse 14, I know, and again, notice, I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it. There's nothing to take from it, for God has so worked that men should fear him. So conclusion number 2, only God's works will remain forever. You won't, not in this life. I don't care what people do with technology. You're not going to remain forever. Not in this life, not apart from something supernatural that God does, but that's not part of our story yet. Verse 15, we're coming up to the third conclusion. That which has been, that which is, has been already, and that which will be, has already been. That sounds like not a tongue twister, but a mind twister. Maybe it's a little bit of both. For God seeks what has passed by. Notice, that which is has been already. Now, it's not saying there's no order of events, but I think maybe it is saying there's no order of events when it comes to the way God sees things. So God knows what he's doing, You know, I can't see what happens until it happens. I can be told about it, but I can't see that. But with God, and some people have said that God lives in the eternal now. Well, I don't know what that looks like, so it's hard for me to envision that. But I think there's a point there that time is not something that binds God. He's the one who created time. And so because of that, notice he knows what he's doing. Verse 16, furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. So there's wickedness, where there shouldn't be. And I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and for every deed is there. So God's going to judge, even though there's bad things happening. Don't worry, God's going to balance the books. He's going to take care of that. And he's going to do that for a time for every matter and for every deed is there. We said there's a time for this and a time for that, a time to be born, a time for die. There's a time for judgment as well. For every matter, for every deed, God has it handled. Verse 18, I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. Our old friend behemoth. That's just the regular word for beast. Actually, it's used way back in Genesis chapter 1. Also in Job, we talk about the behemoth. But same basic word. That men are but beasts. Now, it's not saying that man and animal, man's just another animal, but rather, back in verse 17, he had said that God's going to judge everyone. And in that judgment now we say, notice I said to myself, God's judgment is going to show that they are but beasts. They are beastly. Let me translate it that way. In other words, they act like animals. They act in a way they shouldn't act. That's the point that he's making here. Now we take that and we say, what happens at the end? Verse 19, for the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts, not just the beastly beasts, but all animals, is the same. You say, really? Somebody wrote a thing, do dogs go to heaven or something like that? Well, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about when a person dies and when an animal dies, it looks very much the same, at least from this under the sun perspective. When people die, they don't have a halo around their head, and just animals die and they just don't have the halo. No, as one dies, he says, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath. Now, when you say the same breath in Hebrew, that word ruach for breath, you can also translate that spirit. I think breath is appropriate here. Breath or spirit. And there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity, all is empty. When an animal dies, it looks just like a human dying. When a human dies, it looks just like an animal dying. From the outside looking in, from this under the sun perspective, and you can't tell. This is what we're going to go to in the next verse. So both mankind and beasts, they both die. And verse 20, all go to the same place, that is, into the ground. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. I like the saying where when that prophecy was given by God back in Genesis chapter 3, that you came from the dust, and to the dust you will go. You came from the ground, to the ground you're going to go. You're going to fight the ground, and in the end, the ground's going to win. You're going to take over. Verse 21, who knows? Now notice this who knows clause, because the who knows clause says the author at this point in time, he doesn't know. And so he's writing this from his under the sun perspective, and he's leaving it an open-ended question. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast descends downward to the earth? You can't tell from the outside looking at them. Did the animal go to be with God, or did the animal just go to the ground, and did the man go to be? You can't tell from the outside. It's a bit of a mystery. Now, let me just say, we live in a day when the mystery has been uncovered, when the mystery has been revealed, because someone came and died and rose again. That's the gospel. That's the gospel of Jesus. But he hadn't come yet. This is written in the Old Testament. It hadn't taken place yet. So that had not been clearly revealed. I think it had been hinted at. In fact, it had been revealed, but sort of in a way that was difficult to understand. And I didn't say that, Jesus did. He pointed out that way back in Exodus, God had said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I used to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's life after death. But I wouldn't have picked up on it. And evidently the writer of Ecclesiastes hadn't picked up on that. And so he leaves this as a who knows. Verse 22, I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities. Since you don't know what's in the future, be happy with the now, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Sort of a rhetorical question. You're not going to know this side of heaven. You're not going to know this side of the grave. That because you don't know that, then be happy with what you have been given because God is the one who gave it. So be happy in the end. I think I've already quoted my cousin, Monique Marvez. She likes to end, she's a comedian. She likes to end her shows, get as happy as you can, as fast as you can. And that's actually the message in this sermon of Ecclesiastes. Get happy. And that's a good thing because that is from God. So what we've seen here in this second sermon, Seasons of Life, we noted there's a monotony to life, but to everything there is a season, and God has made everything appropriate or beautiful. He set eternity in our hearts that makes you long for more, and the longing is a hint that maybe there is something there. And that's a gift from God. God's work remains forever, and he will judge. And who knows what comes after that? Well, it hadn't yet been revealed. So in the meantime, enjoy what you have. And that's the closing point there. There's a profit in seeing God as the giver of all the seasons of life. So enjoy that. Enjoy the life that he has given. Enjoy it. And as Cousin Monique would say, and start now.